So we will get started, and I'd like to welcome everybody. Appreciate everybody for coming today and spending some time. Sorry, I'm admitting a couple of new people that just came on.
Hi, Keith. It's Catherine.
Hi, Catherine. Did you have trouble getting on?
Yeah, Teams is not working for me today. This is my third time. So I'll be on my phone. Sorry.
All right. No problem. Thank you. All right. I'm going to start with the rules of the public meeting. The meeting of the ARPA Day Transformation Committee are public meetings as defined by the Connecticut Freedom of Information Act and should follow those guidelines. As this public meeting is held virtually, it will be recorded and made available to view on the DDS website. Committee members must make a good faith effort to state their name and title if applicable. Each time they speak during the meeting, if a committee member would like to speak, please raise your hand and one of the co-chairs will acknowledge you. There is no public comment portion to this meeting. Members of the public are able to join, watch, and listen only. So before we go on, since Catherine, you're not able to see the screen at all, correct?
Correct.
So Trevor, if you could keep an eye out for people raising their hands and help me assist me there, that would be appreciated.
Of course, I can do that for you.
So everybody has received the minutes of the 8/30/2022 meeting. Are there any questions, additions, omissions?
Not for me.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised. All in favor of passing the August 30th meeting minutes? Oh. Okay. Any nays? All right, they're passed. So next we have Cheryl Ellis. Cheryl is a member of the advisory committee and the individual and family committee. Correct, Cheryl? And Cheryl has presented to the advisory committee, and we felt it would be great for her to present to the rest of the committees. So I'm going to pass it off to Cheryl, and she's going to do a presentation on diversity and inclusion. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you. Cheryl Ellis, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with the Department of Developmental Services. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. I want to share my screen. I'm not as tech savvy, so there may be a few glitches, but I know there are some experts probably on the Teams meeting here that may be able to walk me through if I struggle. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Great. So thank you, Keith, for the introduction. And I've been asked to speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the initiatives and goals that we attempt to integrate throughout the practice of DDS. I am new to the position. I started in December of 2021. So I started in a pandemic and I'm still learning the lay of the land. I do come from the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and have worked with DEMIS for a number of years with young adult population, and aging populations as well. I always tell people I'm a lot older than I look, and I started my life in nonprofit and worked many, many years, almost 20 plus years in the nonprofit world. So I come with that lens and that experience of inclusion and having as many voices around the table and as many stakeholders' perspectives around the table. So when I have the opportunity to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work, it always thrills me. And I always come from that viewpoint. So at DDS, our DEI initiative is to really foster diversity, equity, inclusion throughout all levels of the organization, to work collaboratively to promote learning, increase awareness, and create a systemic approach that really helps to foster learning, to foster increased awareness, and to better our system for everyone involved, and to gain the perspective of everyone around the table. I borrowed this diagram. It is not mine, nothing I created, but I really felt that it matched the philosophy of what we were hoping to accomplish in our DEI work at DDS. And it really builds on the philosophy of building competence, developing ways to be more effectively interact, understand, and hear one another, to honor and the dignity and respect and voices of everyone in our community, and to really advocate for change, to advocate for inclusion. Everyone is part of our community. Everyone is involved in and has a voice at the table, and they should have a voice at the table because we're all part of our communities. We're all part of this world. And our goal is to really make sure that we don't forget that in our work. I like graphics, so this was just a very interesting graphic to me. But I do like the idea of everyone surrounding the idea and surrounding and planning. So some of the current initiatives that we've really focused on in the past 7 months, and we know we have much more to do. We've really looked at communication. We've developed an internal monthly newsletter. We've developed a diversity committee statewide. We now have each region with diversity committees and activities. We have our self-advocates as part of those internal committees. We are developing educational and learning series, talking forums such as a coffee conversation where we can dialogue. And right now, a lot of these things are internal. We are looking to expand. Like I said, I've only been in the position for 7 months, but we're looking to expand this. We have future goals. We've developed a strategic plan that will help us to continue the work, to include more voices. We have committees now that are reviewing our forms and some of our processes to make sure that they are inclusive, that the language is not antiquated and no longer person-centered. We are looking at our data to really understand what we do, what's working, what's not working, what might be a better way to serve the communities, and to increase our communication, particularly to underrepresented population. I noticed in a lot of family meetings that I had participated in, there were no people of color around the table, and that's a population that, we do provide, support for. And so we want to make sure the voice is at the table, and we want to continue to increase awareness through our educational series, through our forums, through our conversations. So those are some of the things that we're continuing to strive for. And we know we have a lot of work to do, but we are really starting to pull some things together and do some planning. One of the things that I've done more recently is just look at some data and really to try to get a snapshot of just some demographics. Who do we provide support to? And in this graph, you can see that the majority of individuals we provide support to are white males. And when you look, the next group are Hispanic males, Black males, run very close. But we also, in looking at this, look at how many people are around the table when we talk about changes in forums, and there is oftentimes some groups missing. So we just want to keep this in mind as we have the conversations. We also, one of the things I also decided to look at was language, and I took the top 8 languages spoken in DDS communities. And of course, English was the most commonly used spoken language. Spanish following with about 5.6%. And then sign language followed third with 0.77%. I broke this out in regions to just really get a sense of what does that mean? Are we providing documents and languages that are particularly spoken by the individuals and their families? And excuse me, I looked at our North region, and again, we see that a common language that's not as common in some of the other regions was Polish. And in the South region, another common language that isn't as common in some of the other areas was Italian and Arabic. So, you know, we really look at that. And when we look at the West region, another common language was Portuguese. So do we have documents in Portuguese? Do we have documents in Polish? Do we have documents in Arabic? And so those are the things we just want to keep on our radar as we start to look at diversity and inclusion, because again, we want to make sure all voices are at the table. So I really just like this graphic because I think it captured kind of everything that we think about when we think of diversity and togetherness and really working as a. So that's what I wanted to share, and I will stop sharing my screen and open up and turn things back to Keith. I am not. So I just wanted to turn things back over to you, Keith, if there are any questions or anything further.
All right, does anybody have any questions? Beth?
Hi, thank you for that, Cheryl. I'm just curious, has the department set aside resources to begin to translate all the forms and documents and handbooks, et cetera, into other languages, or you're not even that far in the process?
So one of the approaches that's currently being taken is actually updating all of the documents and make sure that the language is appropriate. I'm not clear if there's been any special funds set aside for the translation of those documents, but it is part of the next steps in terms of making sure they're translated in necessary languages.
Great, and then I guess I should probably say my name, Beth Fisher, CUNY Employment Opportunities CEO. Then my hope would be that at some point, if the department can move forward with that, those resources would be available to providers as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keith Lavalette, DDS. I don't see any other questions, so I would like to thank you, Cheryl, for that presentation. And you're certainly welcome to stay on, but I know you probably have other things to do, but so I appreciate it.
Cheryl Ellis, Director at DEI, thank you very much. I'll stay on for a few moments and then I have to prepare for another meeting.
Okay. Keith Lavalette, DDS. Let's move on to the next thing. And before we get there, I did want to let the committee know that
Bye.
DDS.
Have a good night, Ron.
You too, Phyllis. Bye.
I just muted everybody. There was some background noise, so if you need to speak, you'd have to unmute yourself. But before we move on, I'd like to announce that DDS has hired Deloitte Consulting as the transformational consultant moving forward. We're hopefully going to have them on board in the next few weeks. We're working kind of in the background to get all the paperwork completed, and then they'll be up and running. So we're looking forward to have them on board. I think they'll be a great organization to help us through this transformational process. So next, we have a discussion from committee members on items identified by families or individuals that may interfere with moving to an alternative day setting. While money is a main factor, what other issues would get in the way? And I'm going to kind of change this a little bit because I'm not quite sure. I did get a couple of calls today from family members that had issues getting on. So if providers have issues also, if they want to bring those up, I'd like to have that discussion. I just went through the list and I didn't see any of the family members on. So I guess I'll leave it to the providers. Do anybody have any thoughts? Beth.
Hi, Beth Fisher, CUNY Employment. Well, a few things that come to my mind that I think, families also encounter, or we've also heard from families, that can be barriers, particularly moving into a competitive employment. Transportation would be one. Concerns of residential staffing when individuals change, to a schedule that's not a Monday through Friday that traditionally they've been able to get in, a more conventional type of service. And then the other one that came to mind for me is really a lack of understanding around Social Security entitlements and other benefits, and what happens to those when an individual starts to earn income.
Keith Lavalette, DDS. Thank you, Beth. Jennifer, did I see your hand raised?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think some of the items we talked about at the last session, and that is, I guess it's a funding issue, but the number of hours that a person would get compared to a day program if they're employed is reduced, and that leaves open some challenges for what else are they going to do in their day, and how are they going to be supported if they need a higher level of support outside of work. So that's a major concern. From a provider standpoint, that is where we see a lot of the barriers to employment. Also, the coordination between the families and the residential provider and the day program provider being a very important piece to make that happen. So while as a provider, we may identify individuals who we feel could be competitively employed or work toward that, family members may not feel that that's a good move if it impacts their benefits or impacts their transportation or their personal care needs. And then, of course, some of the individuals that we support have healthcare needs. And so if they need a medication while they're at work, or if they need some accessibility features that aren't at work, like a personal care attendant to help them in the bathroom, that's a big concern, or a barrier, I should say, to employment. And then, of course, Beth raised the very important transportation issue. When we move to one-to-one type service supports, now we need, as providers, we need more transportation. We need more vehicles because we don't live in an environment that makes public transportation easily accessible, and Uber is still super expensive. So those are just some of the immediate things that come to mind.
Keith Lavalette, DDS. Thank you, Jennifer. Beth, is your hand raised again?
Yes, it is. Thanks. Beth Fisher, CUNY Employment Opportunities. Just to add to Jennifer's comment, which I think I agree with everything that she said, but the transportation for those one-to-one services, I think even if we had vehicles, the reimbursement rates for transportation from DDS are, woefully inadequate. We really have phased out providing transportation directly for all of our individuals in independent employment because we're just losing too much money on that particular service. So it is a real challenge, and I know that it's different in different parts of the state too. So if you're, in the Hartford area and you've got an extensive, public transportation system, then you can, do some travel training. But if you're talking about, places like Lower Middlesex County where there's not public transportation, then you find yourself really kind of piecemealing things together, and that can become really complicated and difficult to sustain. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Keith Lavalette, DDS. Yeah, at the advisory committee meeting, they also brought up the having a program that's 25 to 30 hours a week. And that was important to them. The other thing is individual had stated that even though Connecticut's a wonderful state, there are parts of the state, rural parts of the state, they wouldn't want their individual living in because there's nothing around, that type of thing. So that was another concern that they had brought up. Catherine, I don't know if you're able to raise a hand, so I'll just throw this to you if you want to. Did you have any comments to make?
People have made a couple of mine. I was concerned about also the number of hours available and the support of conventional schedules. But I did want to add, I think you said that we don't have families in attendance today, Keith?
I don't see any. I had 2 calls today about people that would not be able to make it. And one said she may try to get on by phone, but I don't see any other phone numbers on. So we could also move this to the next committee meeting to make sure we hear from parents.
Yeah, I was going to recommend that we either move it to the next committee meeting or ask the parents to give us written input, but it might be more helpful to discuss it next time when they're present.
Right. All right. Hearing that, let's move on to the next item, which is the discussion on the incentives. I'm going to share my screen and bring up the PowerPoint that everybody, I send it to everybody. I'll just put it here. Everybody can see this? Keith Lavalette at DDS. Just checking if everybody can see my screen.
Yes, Varian Salter, Self-Advocate Coordinator, DDS. I can see it.
All right, thank you. So I guess we'll just start right here with the transformational changes. Is there anything that people saw here that they may have a chance to view this that we may be missing? Is there any programs that we forgot about? Anything like that? Beth?
Thanks, Keith. Beth Fisher, Kuhn Employment. Yeah, my apologies for missing the last meeting, so perhaps this was discussed. But what about the transition services to ISE or customized employment? Are you not considering a move out of transition to be a transformational change?
Would that be the transition services you're talking about, or is that?
I'm talking about somebody who might start in transition services, but then move into a competitive job, whether through ISE or customized employment.
That's a good.
Keith, this is Catherine Dupree, co-chair. I thought that was included in the list.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list and I don't see it actually. It has DSO to transition services and DSO to project search, but I do believe we did talk about it, but I don't see it here. So, but I believe it was talked about that.
Thank you.
Is there anything else? All right, so we did talk about the incentives and that we're looking to move 200 individuals out of the congregate setting. And then we basically called it the sending provider would receive an incentive payment equal to the current authorization. And then the new placement incentive would receive an incentive payment in addition to the individual's current rate. And then for the ISC, they would be receiving an additional hourly rate of $71.50 per hour, up to 25 hours per week for 6 months. Any questions on that page? Beth?
Beth Fisher from Kuhn. I'm sorry I missed the last meeting because I'm going to have a bunch of questions. So if the sending provider and the receiving provider is the same provider, that provider gets both incentives?
Yes, they do.
Thank you.
Here, let me,
Okay. And
actually, let me move on to this, and I think this would clear it up a little for you, Beth, but we did it in an example, and I'll go through the next few slides. But a provider has a DSO program with 25 individuals, a GSC with 40, and an ISC with 14. We considered the LON 5 for everybody, just to make the example easier. And we talked about individuals moving in 2, 6, 10, and 1, 5, and 10 months. The incentives would be for the sending provider would receive a payment equal to the current authorization of 2008. Then the receiving providers would receive an incentive payment in addition to the individual's current rate of 2008. And then the new placement incentive, the individuals would receive the rate of $55 an hour and then would receive the $71.50 per hour. And here is the how it would look. Individuals A, B, C, D, E, and F would receive a total of $9,036 for a total of $54,206. Individuals A, B, C would in the GSC program would receive $13,000 for a total of $40,000, and then the individuals in the ISC program would receive a total of $46,475. So if it was 3 different providers and the individuals in the DSO would receive a total would receive 54,206. The individuals or the agency in the for the individuals in the GSC would receive 40,482. And for the individuals or the provider for the ISC would receive $139,425. And if they were one agency, that agency would receive $234,113. So any questions on that? Beth?
Yes, Beth Fisher, Kin Employment. So just to clarify, the ISC, the extra incentive will only be on the face-to-face hours that are reported through WebRes Day and not the number of hours worked, because both are reported in WebRes Day. So I wanted just to clarify.
That's a good question, Beth. And all I have is the ISC maximum is equal to up to 25 hours per week for 26 weeks. Sean, are you still on? I was hoping Sean was still on, but he had a meeting at 3, he had to jump off on.
Well, again, Beth Fisher from CUNE. If I may just suggest, maybe taking a look at, doing something with those hours worked. That particular rate has not been raised in a long time, and it really is kind of what helps to support the infrastructure of ISC. So the times that, we're meeting with people from the chamber or whatever, where we don't necessarily have the individual with us. So if that could be looked at, that might be helpful. Thanks.
Jennifer?
Hi, Jennifer Keatley, UCP of Eastern Connecticut. I wonder how many providers only provide group day services and do not have a GSE or an ISE or some form of employment program. I think most agencies work really collaboratively together, but I would think that with the incentives stacked this way, that maybe there'd be more of a, you might be more inclined to move somebody in a program that you're doing so you don't have to work outside of your own agency. So for example, we could move somebody who's interested in doing project search at Mohegan Sun and encourage them to go into that program. We would anyway, because we think that's a great path to competitive employment, but I don't know that the incentive is what's needed to get people to move to competitive employment. Incentive is what's needed for us to sustain, for providers to sustain providing business to and providing supports for people with that we support. I mean, it's the rate is the issue. Moving people to competitive employment is something that we're all really working towards. So and this is time limited, as I understand it also. So beyond the 75 days, that is going to be a challenge to support an individual on a one-to-one basis without that payment going forward, or without the rate being restructured. So those are just my thoughts on that. You know, I think Beth and I could figure it out. We could figure out how to move somebody from one provider to another, but also families, once they get, you know, as they're a part of the team, they're going to have a preference as well in terms of geography, type of program. So I think the incentive is great, but I don't know that there's an incentive to move outside of your agency to find the best option for the individual. I think that's just going to come down to each provider and the teams.
Keith Lavalette, DDS. Jennifer, that exact question has been brought up in the advisory committee also, and they're looking to tackle that question, I guess is the best way to put that.
Thank you.
Questions? So we have the questions to resolve. I'm not going to go read through each of these, but do people have any questions about any of these? Beth.
Yeah, Beth Fisher, CUNY Employment. I'm looking at the agenda, Keith, and I'm wondering, are we going to have any further discussion about things that may cause or delay before we get into these questions to resolve, or are they the same?
Yeah, that's the next agenda item. We were going to move into that next.
Oh, after the questions to resolve? Okay. If I could, again, Beth Fisher from CUNY, just, you know, as I looked at these questions to resolve, you know, comment on the sub-minimum wage 14C certificate. My recommendation would be that this committee not consider that. I think that there are a lot of other initiatives going on around the 14C. We don't know how long it will be even in play. So, you know, I would just hate to see us make some decisions about that really, I mean, I don't know what kind of incentives you could even put together around that 14C, honestly. I think, you know, those of us who still have the 14C, you know, are doing a lot of work to try and figure out, you know, what do we do if that goes away? I know the Nonprofit Alliance is also, you know, kind of taking a look at that whole group supported employment model and what it might mean if that 14C goes away. So I'm not sure it makes sense for this committee to tackle that question, would be one of the things that I would say. I think whatever we do, I think anything that can be done to simplify our system would be welcomed, certainly by providers.
Keith Lavalette, DDS. I guess one of the questions that came up regarding 14C was if an agency decided to move people from sub-minimum wage to minimum wage, should that be incentivized? And I think that's how one of the questions was discussed.
And this is Catherine Dupree, co-chair. I think that is an important question. I think there should be incentives to try to get people to minimum wage. And I think it may take time, but I think that that's the direction the field is going. And I think it would be unfortunate if we couldn't discuss incentives that might help providers get there.
Keith Level at DDS. And it's also been brought up in the advisory committee, and that's also part of that discussion there. Beth, your hand is still up, is it?
Yes, yes, thank you. Beth Fisher-Kuhn, just to kind of respond to that. I think we're talking about group supported employment specifically when we're talking about the 14C. And I think, philosophically, certainly our agency would like to move everybody to minimum wage. So long as the group supported employment model is in place, it's really going to be very cost prohibitive to move away from that minimum wage certificate and be competitive when bidding on contracts in the community. We really pride ourselves on having real GSC crews where we're in an integrated real work environment. And so we're bidding against people who are just applying off the street or other minority businesses. If we don't use that 14C, the only way we could continue to remain competitive in that process is if the incentive was to cover the wages of the individuals on that crew, the difference of what their level of productivity is up to the minimum wage. Otherwise, GSC model just doesn't make sense and work financially for a provider. So that's just to let you know, that's kind of the lens that I'm looking through.
Thank you, Beth.
This is Catherine Dupree, co-chair again. So I think that the issue of incentives for the people making sub-minimum wage in a GSE should be discussed. I don't know if this committee can take on that whole question that you're raising, Beth.
Are there any other questions regarding the questions to resolve in the PowerPoint? Beth?
Beth Fisher-Kuhn, I really don't mean to be the only person raising my hand, but just in terms of the question about the involvement in developing provider plans, I would say that, providers really know what their capacity and their abilities are to make changes. And I think while we welcome other stakeholder input, I would caution us to steer clear of really tying the hands of providers and allowing as much flexibility and creativity as possible. So it's really more of a comment than a question.
Keith Level at DDS. And I think what the goal was is just having the committee, families and individuals should add input to what they think might be important for them and not develop those plans. That would be up to the provider. All right, I do not see any other questions, so I am going to, oh, Jennifer.
Sorry, I do have one more question. It's actually more of a comment. Also, just to echo what Beth said, Jennifer from UCP Eastern Connecticut. The providers really do know their capacity and what they're able to do. And at the same time, many of us have been supporting the same individuals for many years. We've supported people for 30 plus years. And so we know the individuals very well also. In regard to how long does someone need to stay in a new setting, I don't think there should be any restrictions on that. I think that is very person-centered. We hire our regular employees and they work a day or two before they move on to something else. I think the people that we support are not different in that way. For as much as we hope to find people a good employment fit, it's not always a fit. So the incentive should be for getting them there and, giving it a try, and maybe it's prorated. I'm not sure, but, I wouldn't say there should be a minimum involved in that. And I think it should be, again, based on what the provider is able to do. We keep trying and we keep working toward that with the individual, but sometimes these things take, stops and starts, and isn't necessarily a smooth transition. So I don't think there should be a minimum. I think there should be, an incentive for getting somebody there, even if it doesn't work out for the very long term.
Catherine Dupree, co-chair. Can I just ask a question to clarify, Jennifer? Are you suggesting that even if the person ends up going back to their DSO quickly, that the incentive be in place?
I am, yes, because again, I think the work is still being done with the individual to help them achieve their long-term goal of competitive employment or employment. And it may just be temporary that they're back in. I think it needs to be prorated, and I don't think that there's a minimum amount of time that they have to stay in the job. To be successful at getting somebody employed and outside of the DSO.
But
Keith
if they
Lavalley.
return to the DSO, that hasn't been successful necessarily.
Well, I would disagree. I think, anybody that moves into employment and out of the DSO for if it's a day or a week or a month, I think that's success if they've never done that before. And I think ideally it's a long-term objective, but at the same time, we have to support whatever it is that they need. So if it doesn't work and they need to go back to the DSO, I think that's where our system can be inflexible. And we need to continue to work on that flexibility. And again, I don't think that I like the incentives because we're underfunded to begin with, and it gives us, a way to support what we do. But I don't necessarily, if the rate was generous enough to be able to allow people to move in and out of these settings, that would be the ideal. And I don't think we need an incentive necessarily to help somebody become employed if that's something that they want and value.
This is Catherine Dupree, co-chair. So I would agree with those statements because it seems to me the incentives are being set up for us to take a certain number of people, which is actually, I think, a small percentage of people in DSOs, 200 people, and actually get them sustained employment. I think you're correct that the system itself should support that back and forth for people, but maybe that's outside of this incentive question.
Okay.
Keith Lavalley, DDS, just for clarification purposes, Jennifer. So what you're saying, if a person, let's say, was there for 30 days, they should receive the incentive for 30 days instead of the 4 or 6 months incentive.
I think
correct?
so, yes.
Okay.
That is correct.
Beth.
Beth Fisher, CUNY Employment. I just want to add my support to Jennifer's comments. I think it's really important to look at a placement, whether it lasts for 2 days, 2 months, or 2 years, as a success, because some of these individuals we're talking about have never worked independently, and just even getting through an interview process takes a lot of work. And it's going to be baby steps for some people just to be able to build their confidence. I mean, I would look at that and say, you know what, it didn't work out, but a really great job that you were able to, hold on to that job for 2 days. Now let's, what do we do to make it longer next time? So I totally support that comment.
Thank you, Beth. Are there any other questions? Stop sharing my screen. And we kind of been talking right about this, but the discussion from committee members on things that may delay or cause issues with moving forward with the final goals or outcomes. Do people have any other concerns about the different issues that we may have moving forward? Or did we touch them all? Touch on them all? I'm sure we'll have a few more as we go through. Beth?
That's Fisher Q Employment. Yeah, just two more that come to my mind. You know, on behalf of all my colleagues out there, you know, one of the big challenges is going to be the current staffing crisis. I know this committee cannot solve that, but I think it's really important that, you know, we keep that in mind and we don't lose sight of that. The other thing that I would say is, you know, the incentives are going to be great, but they're going to add another layer of complexity to the billing and the rates for ISC. And I would argue that those rates are already way too complex as they are. I have had the experience where case managers, resource managers really just don't want to be bothered, you know, with trying, and maybe that's not fair. I should, you know, not that they don't want to be bothered, but it's a challenge sometimes for them to really be able to process, you know, all of the, particularly the benchmark payments that come into place. I think when we very first looked at putting the current structure into place, there was a lot of discussion around really being able just to request all those benchmarks and incentives up front and then using them, you know, getting the approval and then using them as you move forward. My understanding is the reason that did not happen was that DDS did not want to have all of those dollars tied up in commitments in case they didn't come through. But I think whatever we do with the rates and the incentives and the benchmarks, if there's a way that we can simplify all of it, I think there's going to be better overall outcomes.
Keith level at DDS. Thank you, Beth. Any other questions? All right, so we are at the end of our agenda. I know it got through a little early today. Our next meeting is September 27th. And like I said at the beginning of the meeting, that we have Deloitte Consulting as our consultants for the transformational process. I am not sure if we're going to be able to add them by then, but I'm hopeful that either the next meeting or the one after that, that will be up and running with them. And, you know, kind of, I think we all would have liked to have the consultants on and go through the process and then work with the committees and kind of do it in a one streamlined way. It's now more of kind of working in parallel with them. Our goal as a committee is to work on these incentives and get these going so providers have time to develop their plans. We only have until I guess June of 2024 to get this completed. So there's a lot of work to be done. So hopefully between the Deloitte consultants and our committee, we can get these working as a parallel going forward and getting this accomplished. Catherine, do you have anything else?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you, Keith.
Right.
I just would recommend that we move that one item again to next meeting's agenda, and hopefully our families will be with us as well.
Yeah, it was unfortunate that, you know, prior to the meeting today, I did get 2 phone calls that they weren't, some emergencies came up. So it was unfortunate. All right. Well, thank you all. And Again, our next meeting is September 27th at 2:30. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.